Welcome back to DC EKG, where we diagnose DC's policy diseases and prescribe needed solutions.
I've been working in DC since 1994, and I couldn't imagine anything better than a career that you dedicate to making people freer and more prosperous. It has wrecked the U.S. economy, and just about everything that Congress has tried to do
Makes it worse.
Has been trying to fix the problems that Congress itself created
and made it worse.
Distortion. Oh, yeah, and then they also make it worse. That's the part where Medicare is not just a symptom of government failure, but also a cause of government.
Right.
And if you really want to punish taxpayers in other countries, cut drug prices here.
Michael Cannon, welcome to DC
Joe
EKG.
Grogan, thank you for having me.
So I thought you've been around Washington, D.C. for a while. It's overdue that you've been on the show, but I didn't really feel like I knew enough to be able to have you on because you're so argumentative and it would be too difficult. So I've been studying.
I take issue with that.
I've been studying. Why don't you talk about the Cato Institute? What is it? How long has it been in existence? What do you do there?
I've been working in D.C. since 1994, and before I had employment in D.C., I had already set foot in the Cato Institute and decided that would be the coolest job I can imagine, because I was a young libertarian and I interviewed for an internship there and I didn't get it. So I always tell our interns, you're already doing better than I was at your age. I couldn't imagine anything better than a career that you dedicate to making people freer and more prosperous and just advancing human freedom. And so when I began working downtown for a libertarian organization in 1994,
This was out of college or in college?
this was just less than a year out of college, because I worked on a congressional campaign. And then
Who was that?
that was Kyle McSlarrow, another former Senate staffer.
He was, where was he from?
I know where he ran.
Yeah, where did he
I
run?
forgot.
I mean-
Virginia's 8th congressional district.
Okay.
Gerrymandered for Democrats. He ran 2 years in a row and got clobbered both times. And Oliver North at the top of the ticket in 94 didn't help in Northern Virginia.
Oh, right.
Anyway.
Yeah, you know, G. Gordon Liddy used to talk about Colin McSlarrow all the time. I can't remember what it was. Whether did he hate him or did he like
I don't remember either. I stopped listening. I probably stopped listening by that point. But worked on his campaign, and that was 94. And that was such a bad district in such a bad year that even in 94, he lost. I went to work for a libertarian organization downtown, and I had no aspirations of working in health policy. None whatsoever. I just wanted to work in the liberty movement. And when they said, hey, the policy shop where I was working said, hey, we like your work. We'd like to hire you. But the only job we can offer you is health policy. And we feel an obligation to tell you why it's open, why that position is vacant. It's because it's really difficult issue. I said, I don't care. I'll take it. And that was 1996. And I've been doing health policy ever since. So that's 29 years.
Did you ever go back to college, get an advanced degree? Or you just stuck and studied? And
I think it was 8 years after that when I started at the Cato Institute. I went back to grad school, got a degree in law and a degree in economics
from
George Mason University.
Okay. So let's talk about Cato itself. In 94 or in 96, were they in this building that they're in now, or were they in a different?
Yes. So I think that was 93 that they moved into 1000 Massachusetts Avenue. So that's where I had my interview for the internship.
Okay. And they're we're calling it the premier libertarian think tank
in the world.
And because if it's in the United States, it's going to be the world, right? So how big is it?
You know, when I started, it was around 100 employees, and now I don't know if we've hit 200 yet. Maybe we have. It's hard to say. It's hard to get a feel for it because there's so much more remote work now.
Oh, right.
But we do have more people, I think, than the building can hold. Even with an expansion of the building that came in 2012, about 13 years ago. So I think it's around 200.
For you, and I'm jamming you with this question, I realize, but when you think about the libertarian movement, 96 when you arrived and where we are now, do you think the libertarian movement has gotten stronger? Has it gotten weaker? Has it morphed? How do you think libertarianism is from that period, which would have been, smack dab in the middle of the Clinton administration?
Just to reassure the conservatives who might be listening that I get them, that I see them. I'm going to quote Morton Blackwell.
Oh, sure.
That all gains are increments, but not all increments are gains.
Right.
And so the libertarian movement has had a lot of successes when it comes to making the movement more libertarian, making the movement bigger, and some policy wins. But the movement has also had some pretty serious setbacks. So making the movement bigger, the Cato Institute has grown. There are more libertarian organizations out there than there were back in 96. I mean, I don't know when the Institute for Justice or the Pacific Legal Foundation or other libertarian groups that are now littering the landscape exactly when they emerged, but there's a lot more of them out there now. And they're doing great work. And expanding the reach and the appeal of our ideas. And there have been policy wins. A lot of states are decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana and may do the same with other drugs. Gay marriage is now legal. So we're not discriminating against gays and lesbians and denying them that civil right. At the same time, I don't know if you've ever paid any attention to the Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
We like to emphasize that the Cato Institute, we're small L libertarians, and we have no affiliation with the capital L libertarians at the Libertarian Party. That is a real disappointment, and I think a real detriment to the liberty movement. What has happened with that party?
That it's no longer a viable force?
Well, it was never a viable political party, largely because of the way that the federal government regulates political speech through regulations that we call campaign finance laws. But because of those campaign finance laws, because they make it so hard for a third party to gain any traction, especially in the sort of system that we have right now, which is single member district plurality elections. It's so hard for a third party to gain any traction that the third parties remain very small, and it's very easy for them to get captured by even smaller groups, including unsavory groups.
When those libertarian wins, can you point to any on the economic front, economic liberty, economic libertarianism on the march, as opposed to, say, the alternative view on, say, gay marriage or drug legalization would be, yeah, those are left of center moral issues, and they're not so much about libertarianism. But
so
I think a lot of people would identify with libertarianism. Yeah, they're sympathetic on the social moral front, but they also want economic liberty, or maybe even more so, they want economic liberty.
So one challenge that the movement has faced is that it has focused on economic liberty to the exclusion of other areas of liberty. And so a lot of people think that that's what libertarianism is. It's just economic liberty, when really it's so much more than that. It's just respecting the equal dignity of everyone and preventing the government from taking away your right to live your life however you want, as you respect the equal rights of others to do the same. And that means that the government shouldn't, it is a restriction of your liberty if the government tells you what kind of drugs you can put in your body. And it is a restriction of your liberty if the government tells you where you can live or can't live. And a lot of people, now I mention immigration because a lot of people would put that in the non-economic issues category. I think it's an economic issue and a personal freedom issue. It's both. And there are lots of other areas of public policy and individual liberty that we wouldn't put into the category of economic freedom, but that are very important to libertarians because we care about all the dimensions of liberty across the board.
So immigration, you have it in the economic category, you have it economic and human rights.
Well, yes, both, because immigration laws, as we've seen, split up families. They deny people the right to marry and live with whom they choose. It's a personal freedom issue, but it's also an economic freedom issue because as economists have estimated, if you eliminated all immigration restrictions around the world, gross world product, economic output across the world would double. We would become vastly wealthier.
And why is that?
It's because you would be able to move to where where their skills are most in demand, and they could rise to their highest value in the market and become the most productive. And the U.S. economy would grow, and other economies would grow. We'd be able to get, if we had more low-skilled immigration into this country, we would get vastly more affordable services. So I just wrote a piece, and I'm speaking on a panel next week about long-term care. And it's always counterintuitive to all these healthcare wonks when I say to them that the most important thing we could do to make long-term care more universal is eliminate all immigration restrictions. Because there are millions of people outside of this country who would love to come into this country and make a living caring for wealthier, older U.S. residents who need long-term care services and supports. But those immigration restrictions are denying those U.S. residents access to more affordable long-term care and denying residents of other countries the opportunity to come to this country and make their lives better by making other people's lives better. And so, I mean, that's one example that intersects with healthcare of how immigration restrictions are holding back economic productivity and human happiness, and how eliminating those restrictions could improve both.
So that's interesting on the home health care and the nursing home care. I think that in the first Trump administration, we did a report on choice and competition. I think it was in that report we talked about visas for physicians who were educated overseas and expanding the visa requirements, which got through. Even in term one, we were pretty hardcore on immigration restrictions at the time, but there was a recognition that allowing doctors to move more freely, and I think nurses too would potentially bring down costs, or economics would argue would bring costs down.
I would say that maybe the Trump administration and I are both hardcore on immigration restrictions, but the Trump administration is repressive on immigration restrictions.
Well, maybe we'll get into that in a little bit more. So when you've been at this since 1996 as were you the director from the very beginning?
No, I started at Cato in 2004. I just passed 21 years at Cato, and I announced that to my team, and my intern said, "What a coincidence! I'm turning 21 later next month."
Okay,
and so
he's
not my intern.
What did I miss here? What happened in 96? You went.
So I was working in an organization called Citizens for Sound Economy.
Oh, okay.
You may now know that as Americans for Prosperity.
Yeah.
And from there, I went to work for the Senate Republican leadership, doing healthcare and a bunch of other issues. I told them at the time, I'm not a Republican. They said, "Why are you here?" I said, "You called me." And so, but they hired me to work on healthcare.
Sell out when you were doing that, by the way? As a libertarian?
No, not at all. I mean, there were challenges. They told me you can write and do work on health, education, labor, welfare, and the Second Amendment. And there are, lots of liberty expanding ideas that I could push in each of those areas, especially since, Congress had just limited government in the area of welfare reform. That's another huge success. Right. But they also told me you are to write and say nothing about gay rights, foreign policy, the drug war, and all sorts of other issues where Republicans and libertarians disagree. Immigration.
Just so that I understand, on all those issues, you were aligned with libertarians. Like, there's no Michael Cannon heresy on any of those issues.
So there was for a time. I mean, I began my political maturation as a social democrat. I hung campaign materials around my neighborhood in 1988 for Michael Dukakis' presidential campaign.
Oh, God.
And I had, I followed a course.
When you think back on that, do you say, oh my God?
So I've had to forgive myself, and I think everyone should forgive themselves.
Me too.
For their past ignorance.
Right.
As they're striving to, get better. And I followed the same ideological evolution or trajectory that a lot of libertarians have. I began as a leftist, learned a little something about economics, and said, oh, wait a second, the way to help the nation's poor is actually to increase productivity, make more stuff, drive down the prices and through the market process that makes everything more universal. And then after that, I was still a social conservative for a time, and I began to shed a lot of that social authoritarianism as well. So I was for gay marriage before Barack Obama was, but not before a lot of my colleagues at the Cato Institute.
So you're doing policy on the Senate side.
Yes.
And then you ended up at Cato in 2001.
2004.
2004. Okay, so that's smack dab in the middle of the Bush administration, right? So by 2004, we've been hit with September 11th. We had invaded Iraq. I think we were in Afghanistan. We had invaded Iraq. That summer, we passed Part D, I think.
December of 2003.
December 2003. Okay. How are you feeling at Cato at that point in the libertarian movement and in healthcare?
So it's funny you should bring up Iraq, because it's another one of my past ignorances for which I've had to forgive myself. I supported the Iraq invasion.
Right. Well, a lot of people did.
And most libertarians didn't. And I think they were right. And so that's another example. But at the Cato Institute, the big question that I got about Part D was, obviously this is a huge expansion of government and the wealth and the entitlement state. But it also had this little sweetener in there for conservative free market advocates, which we call health savings accounts. They put that in there to get some conservative votes in the House. Is the cost of the Part D benefit, the Part D entitlement, and that expansion of government worth the benefit of health savings accounts? At the time, I wrestled with the idea. Now I think the answer is no. I mean, I'm glad that health savings accounts are there. We can build on them, but I still think that was a huge mistake, and we could have gotten health savings accounts at a much lower cost or some even better.
Looking back on it, how should Part D have been created? Or should it not be created?
It shouldn't have.
So there should have been no government subsidy whatsoever for drugs for seniors.
Or health care at all. And the reason is that the Medicare program is both a symptom and a cause of the government failure in healthcare. It's a symptom because the reason so many seniors lacked health insurance in 1965 is because Congress had spent the previous 40 years penalizing people if they bought lifelong health insurance to cover them into retirement. It said you can only avoid this implicit penalty that Congress created in the tax code. That Treasury bureaucats and Congress.
Okay, walk through this. So you're going kind of fast here. So let's explain it. Imagine I'm your Labrador Retriever. I'm sitting.
He's a golden, but so he may not be as smart.
So walk through what Congress was doing to penalize that product and regulate that product.
So 1913, Congress passes the second federal income tax. I say second to remind everybody that we can repeal these things. We can let them lapse. And so
right. First one was during the Civil War.
Civil War, right.
Right.
So 1913 Congress passed, and at the time, there's no such thing as health insurance as we know it. Health insurance as we know it didn't emerge until like 1929. But so in 1913, no one in Congress gave any thought, and there's nothing in this statute creating the federal income tax about whether health benefits that employers provide to their workers would be compensation that's subject to the tax. And the Treasury bureaucrats who had to wrestle with this, Congress had no idea how complex this question was, the question that they left to the Treasury Department bureaucrats. The bureaucrats didn't know until they tried to solve it, and they threw their hands up. They said, this is so complex. We're just going to say that any group insurance that employers are providing to their workers will not be subject to the income tax. So if you think about it, what they were saying was if your employer gives you $1 of cash,
right,
it's subject to the income tax. You have to pay taxes on that.
Right.
But if your employer takes the same dollar and gives it to you as health insurance, it's tax-free. You get $1 worth of health insurance.
Right.
So whatever the marginal tax rate is an effective penalty on you taking that dollar as cash and using it to buy health insurance that you choose and that meets your needs. And that penalty is effectively coercing you into enrolling in a health plan that your employer chooses, that meets your employer's needs, maybe more than yours, and that disappears when your job disappears, including when you retire. So that began in about the 1920s is when the Treasury folks made this ruling, and then Congress codified it in the 1950s. But by the time 1965 comes around, you've had 40 years of this implicit penalty.
But wait a second, back up. What was I buying if I was working for Ford Motor? Okay, let's just assume it's Ford Motor. And I'm presented with the choice of, I guess I have, if I wasn't given that group health insurance, employer insurance, what would I have been buying on the open market? You said that there was a product that was penalized. What that would have carried me through retirement age?
So remember, during this period from the 1920s to 1965, health insurance was still emerging. It was an emerging market because
there were a lot of different products.
Not only had no one invented it until like 1929, but the reason for that there wasn't much demand because there wasn't much medicine could do for you.
Right.
I forget what year penicillin came around, but it was after the income tax.
I think it was during World War II.
Before. And so most of the time, what medicine could do for you was a lot less than what it could do now. And it wasn't as expensive because either it fixed you or it didn't, and you would die. And so then there wasn't much demand. And so from the get-go, the tax code is distorting people's health insurance decisions and pushing people in the direction of employer-sponsored plans. And yet, even with that implicit penalty on the relatively free, what we call individual market for health insurance. By the time Medicare came around, anyway, there were dozens and dozens of insurance companies offering cradle to grave health insurance coverage that not only covers you into retirement, but that also protected you against your against getting your coverage dropped or your premiums going up if you got sick. So that was out there, but Congress was instead penalizing people if they bought those plans and only allowing people to avoid the penalty if they enrolled in employer-sponsored insurance, which disappears when you turn 65 and retire. And so in 1965, Congress looks around and says, why do all these retirees lack health insurance? Let's create a Medicare program. The demand for Medicare came about because of a prior government failure, a distortion of the health insurance market that encouraged people to enroll in insurance that disappears when they retire.
And a distortion of the tax code.
The tax code is what distorted the health insurance market. Yeah.
So we can get into the details of this, but before we do, as a first principles issue, one way to look at this is anything that gets excluded from taxation that people want to pay for, fine. Great, because it's more freedom.
Maybe.
Right? But your first principle is no, it's a distortion of the marketplace by having some tax advantage, some things tax advantage and some things not tax.
I used to hold your view. In fact, when I was at Citizens for a Sound Economy, I had that view. But I've come to the view that really what's happening is that Congress is sort of weaponizing the income tax and the payroll tax to turn it into a mandate machine. Now, when Congress passed Obamacare, we all recognized that it was coercive when the government says, buy this product or else pay a penalty.
Right.
That's exactly what the tax code does and has been doing since the 1920s. But for some reason, we call that a tax break. And I know why we call it a tax break. It's because there's this tax that applies to all these things, but it doesn't apply to this thing, and that's good. Because if I like this thing, then Congress isn't taxing me on the money that I use to buy this thing. But a couple things. One, there was never a situation where, because health insurance didn't exist really until the Treasury Department said it won't be subject to the income tax. So for the entire history of health insurance, basically the income tax, there was never a time when Congress did tax employer-sponsored insurance and then decided not to. Okay. So for this entire history, the income tax has always had a penalty on insurance that you control and that you buy.
Right.
And so I think it's important not to look at the labels that we put on something like exclusion or tax break or tax exemption, and look at the practical, functional, economic impact that it has on people's decision-making. And when you do that, you see that the situation that the income tax with an exclusion for employer-sponsored health insurance creates is identical to the one Obamacare created.
Okay, but why can you solve this problem by just saying it's tax deductible if I buy it as opposed to my employer buy it for me?
That would give you a little more control over your health insurance decisions, but it would still be a mandate to buy health insurance, just a broader range of health insurance plans.
Because there's a tax break?
Because if you spend the money on the thing the government wants, then the government leaves you alone. But if you don't spend that money on the thing the government wants, the government penalizes you.
Okay. Does that apply to, say, charitable donations?
So once you come to see targeted tax preferences in this way, you realize that the entire federal tax code has become like a mandate machine.
Right.
And that's essentially what it is.
So flat tax with no deductions is where Michael Cannon is.
If we're talking about my ideal world.
Yes, of course. Let's go to the ideal world.
Then I'd probably have a land use tax because those are the least distortionary taxes out there. But that's something you only talk about in your economics seminars.
Wait. Wait.
I would say
because I'm fascinated by the land use tax, but just for an income, we have to have an income tax. What is your ideal structure for that?
If we have to have an income
tax.
Tax.
It's the point of
when I was working at Citizens for a Sound Economy, we had this whole huge campaign and effort to promote flat tax.
Right.
I think it was 17%. The Halra-Bush Dick Armey flat tax. And I think that it should have not only no targeted or special tax preferences, exemptions, deductions, credits, anything. It also shouldn't even have a personal exemption. It should apply to every single dollar that you earn, not to investment or earnings or
Not capital gains?
no capital gains, no interest or dividends, so that it really is as close to a consumption tax as an income tax can be. What that would do is it would dramatically reduce the government's interference in the economy. It would dramatically improve economic growth. It would vastly improve the health sector, because that distortion the government creates, that penalty on your control of your own health insurance and healthcare decisions, has had so many more harmful effects than just the one that I mentioned about leaving seniors without health insurance. It has wrecked the U.S. economy, and just about everything that Congress has tried to do
Makes it worse.
Has been trying to fix the problems that Congress itself created
and made it worse.
Distortion. Oh, yeah. And then they also make it worse. That's the part where Medicare is not just a symptom of government failure, but also a cause of government failure.
Right. Out of curiosity, so tariffs, where do you come down on the spectrum of intestinal irritation?
Oh, revulsion.
With tariffs, even if they're flat? Even if it's like a 10% tariff, why is that different than a consumption tax?
They are consumption taxes, but they're consumption taxes on imports. And you can have a consumption tax that is less distortionary by imposing a consumption tax on imports and exports. Why not have it on both? One of the problems with tariffs.
Or wait, don't you mean anything consumed, not anything that crosses a border? Like if I consume
a consumption tax. So like a national retail sales tax, for example. Or a value-added tax. These are consumption taxes, and they apply to both domestically produced goods and services as well as those that we import. But one of the problems with tariffs is that if you give the government the power to impose tariffs, then domestic producers go lobby Congress, and they say that you got to block unfair foreign competition, people dumping goods in this market, and maybe the Chinese are presenting a threat to our national security, and so we got to block all of their goods for that reason. You create the opportunity for a lot more rent seeking and even xenophobia when you give the government the power to impose consumption tax on foreign goods that we call a tariff.
Let's back up a little bit to Part D and its creation in the health savings accounts. When the Inflation Reduction Act passed under President Biden, no Republican support, all Democrat support. I wrote a couple columns saying this is going to be a disaster. Some other great people wrote, who I admire very much, wrote same conclusion, different reasons why. You were not that upset about the inflation reduction. Is that an accurate assessment?
Not as upset as other critics. Yes.
So why are you not upset?
So there's a lot in the Inflation Reduction Act that I didn't like the title was a nonsense title.
Right.
It didn't reduce it.
It's a lie.
Yeah. Well, it's like,
how could it how it's not going to, it produces inflation.
Like Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act or Medicare Modernization Act. So
what do you mean? Because it put more benefits in?
Because that's the law that created Part D.
Right.
And it didn't modernize the Medicare program. It's nonsense. So anyway, if you want to know what a bill does, or a law does, read the title and assume it does the opposite.
Exactly.
We'll be right more often than wrong.
The Patriot Act,
for example. But you were asking about the Inflation Reduction Act, and what I liked about that law is that it tried to reduce spending on Medicare by reducing the prices that Medicare pays for prescription drugs. Now, you would think that would be an idea that Republicans being the party of limited government, at least, when I entered the policy debate, my professional life, that's the mantle they claimed. But when it comes to prescription drugs in Medicare and prescription drugs more broadly, and just healthcare more broadly, Republicans often end up in the thrall of the pharmaceutical lobby, or the healthcare industry seduces them into expanding government by tricking them with some phrases about and some half-baked economic theories about how Medicare operates, or what various policy proposals will do. And I'll give you an example. How many times have you heard the claim that with the Inflation Reduction Act, Democrats are importing foreign price controls?
I don't know. Did I?
Many times.
Have I said that before?
I don't know. I don't know if I've ever heard you say it, But I've heard so many people say it. I've seen letters, full page ads in the Wall Street Journal,
Right.
where free market groups sign on to that sort of rhetoric that's pure rent seeking by the pharmaceutical industry, who just wants to keep the Medicare prices high.
Okay, wait a second.
And we can talk about why that rhetoric is false.
But as a threshold matter, how are government price controls on anything not an expansion of government?
Well, if you already have government price controls in place and all you're doing is adjusting them, that's not an expansion of government.
But there weren't government price controls in place for Medicare Part D.
Weren't there, Joe?
No, tell me how there were.
Well, there were government distortions.
Oh, yeah, but government distortions is a different issue.
There are government. So Medicare buys lots and lots of medical care. Okay.
Right.
And sometimes the way it buys them is it basically lets the industry set the price. And that's what Medicare did for the first couple decades with physician prices for physician services.
Right.
Let the physicians set the prices, hospitals too. And that drove prices upward. Okay. So while not a price control, it is a wild distortion of those prices.
Okay.
And the same thing has been happening in Part D and been happening in what we call Medicare Part B for a very long time. That's the part of Medicare that pays for drugs that physicians administer in their offices and other physicians.
Or in hospitals.
Sure. Well,
yeah.
Part B in hospitals?
Yeah, infusion.
A doesn't cover all of it? Are they outpatient or?
I thought
whatever the
drugs
case.
Infused in the hospital were Part B.
Whatever the case, what the government is doing in these areas is driving up prices way above where they would be in a market system. And if then the government comes in and says, we're not going to pay a price that high, we're going to pay a lower price. Two things about that. You're not expanding the size of government because if the government is spending less, that reduces the size of government. It reduces spending, all else equal, it reduces spending and it reduces the tax burden. Now, all else was not equal with the Inflation Reduction Act because Congress then took that savings and put it into other stuff that expanded government. But the Inflation Reduction Act provisions, reducing spending on Medicare, fine. I'm okay with that. In part because it's not a price control. A price control, it is a government set price, but that's different from a price control. A price control is when the government says to private actors, you cannot sell at above this price or below this price. It's when the government interferes with your freedom to engage in mutually beneficial economic exchanges with consenting adults. And by saying you can't execute that transaction at the price you want, you have to do it at the price we want. But when the government is buying stuff, that's not the same situation because the government is one of the parties to the transaction. And there's no reason why the government shouldn't have as much say about the price as anyone else who's engaging in a voluntary economic transaction.
Well, yeah, but I've got skin in the game. And the market, if I'm a patient in the Medicare program and I want a drug, I need a drug.
Yeah.
You've
got not only your skin in the game, you've got my skin in the game.
So the market, so
because
now
I'm paying the taxes to buy your drug.
Right. So now the government has the Part D program, to your own argument, has distorted the price that I have to pay. And it's artificially high, right? So, but I have according to your argument, it's artificially high.
Sure.
Now it's artificially set by the government choosing.
Well, the government was setting it artificially high, and
it wasn't setting it; it was
sending
it. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
And then after the Inflation Reduction Act, the government is distorting it upward less,
marginally.
Yeah,
sure,
marginally. And
but when you look at the amount of money spent in the Inflation Reduction, let's not forget the Biden administration had to come in with this massive demonstration project in order to shovel money into the Medicare Part D program. They built a huge bureaucracy that's no different than setting up, a bunch of party apparatchiks in the basement of the Politburo looking at the prices of wheat and what they're going to set the price at. And so the savings are marginal, and you've got a huge new bureaucracy you've expanded.
The bureaucracy is probably less costly than the inflated prices. But I do take your point, which is that it's probably not going to work.
Yeah.
And I've always said that. I've always said that this is how government, or one of the ways that government expands is like this. When you pass a bill, could be like Part D. Well, Part D is all deficit spending. But when you pass a bill and try to have, no budget impact, don't increase the deficit like Obamacare purported to do and the Inflation Reduction Act purported to do, There's going to be a mix of spending and revenue measures. So dessert and spinach. And the stuff that ends up surviving is the spinach, is the dessert, the goodies that you give out to people because they like that or whatever. The reductions in the prices that Medicare pays for drugs was the spinach. And that took subsidies away from people who were expecting those subsidies, mostly drug companies. And they will always go after those provisions and lobby to roll them back. And so what you end up with is, over time, the expansion of government, the new spending, tends to survive, but the cuts that you try to enact don't, or other measures to try to either raise revenue or even limit government. Another example that comes to mind is the Cadillac tax. That was some of the spinach in Obamacare. That Congress repealed that almost unanimously.
You like the Cadillac tax?
Wasn't my favorite. It was my second most favorite part of Obamacare.
What was the favorite?
All the cuts to Medicare.
Which never occurred.
Well, some of them probably did, but they did their best. Like I said, consistent with the whole spinach and dessert thing, they did their best to gut them with, a demonstration program that enrolled every Medicare Advantage plan into this quality bonus demonstration program, and gave out quality bonuses for plans that were, mediocre.
Okay, let's take a step back on the part.
Which eliminated a lot of the purported savings to Medicare Advantage.
Right. Okay, so let's just take a step back on Part D for a second. If you agree, let's just stipulate for a, well, you're not going to stipulate anything, but let me make an argument here. Okay, you want people to be healthy, you want them to be productive, and we have, as a society, value health. So we want more drugs to be invented that improve health. We want more cures invented. Look at Part D as a subsidy, just like NIH fund research, a subsidy of basic scientific research that sometimes down the line gets picked up and invented into drugs. Not to the extent that the left wants to make the argument, but it does. So can you stipulate that Part D stimulated research and drug development, that more drugs have been developed and come on the market because of that subsidy?
So I want people to be free so that they can choose how much to value health and how much to value productivity and so forth. Because if I try to elevate health among other values, then I am imposing my values on them. And I think that violates the principle of human equality. So I want the government not to be making these decisions for people so that they can make those decisions for themselves. Now, I think that in a polity and an economy like that, you're going to get a lot of innovation in new drugs and other medical tests and treatments that are going to help people pursue the value of health, if that's what they want to do. And that's all to the good. And there is a problem that economists call the public goods problem, or a market failure, an externality. That means that maybe we won't get, if people are as free as Michael wants them to be, maybe we won't get the socially optimal level of new drug innovation. Because if it takes $1 billion to come up with a new miracle cure, if it costs $1 billion to make the first pill,
right? Because
you're baking in the cost of all that research and development and the new knowledge that you've generated, it may only cost $2 to make the second pill, because to make the second pill, you don't have to generate all that knowledge. You already did.
Right.
And everybody wants to pay for the second pill and not the first pill. Right. But if nobody pays for the first pill, you're not going to get the first pill. And so you might not be getting all of the cures that you could be getting. So a lot of people see a role for government there to correct that so-called market failure, to encourage the generation of new knowledge that will create more cures and help people pursue this value of health. The way the government usually does that is through patents, telling people that when you, drug innovators, that when you synthesize this new molecule and you do the tests that show that it's going to save lives, then you can let it onto the market and you will have some number of years of marketing exclusivity, right, where you don't have to charge $1 billion for the first pill and $2 for the second one. You could spread out the cost of R&D over a number of years, charge a price that allows you to recoup that investment and creates an incentive for people to undertake those investments in the first place.
Right.
And that's the way that economists and lawmakers and most people say, okay, that's how we're going to encourage drug development. Does the Medicare Part D program, by jacking up the prices that we pay for drugs, also encourage drug development? And the answer is yes. I think undoubtedly yes. But that's not necessarily a good thing. There's research that suggests that a lot of the new drug development that we're getting as a result of Part D is very low value drug innovation, where if you, how do we know it's low value? Economists have come up with ways to try to measure what would seniors do if you gave them the money? Would they still buy this drug? If you gave them the cash, would they still buy this treatment that they're buying on the taxpayer, when the taxpayer is spending? And they've found evidence that suggests that no, they wouldn't. That means that the innovations, some of the innovations we're getting are low value innovations, and suggests that Medicare Part D might be jacking up the prices too high, even from an innovation perspective. But also, isn't it kind of weird that this is the justification for Part D, something that it was never supposed to do? It was never, no one ever said, hey, I know, we need to encourage new drug innovation. So let's create this new subsidy program for prescription drugs. If that were the goal, we should have just lengthened the patent lives, the term of pharmaceutical patents. But Congress didn't do that. And so now when people criticize Part D for the fact that it's driving up drug prices, advocates of Part D, be they partisan advocates who don't want to admit that they did something wrong, or the drug company that wants to keep getting these high prices, they fall back on this argument of innovation. We can't do anything that would reduce innovation. That's interesting. It's like they're retconning the whole purpose of Part D. And it also suggests that they don't seem to understand that there is such a thing as too much research and development into new drugs and too much drug innovation.
They're admitting that there's too much.
They're not. They don't seem to. They don't seem to
grasp
that.
Because it's societal value.
Because if you think about it, listen to what the drug companies say about how reducing prices in Medicare would limit drug innovation, because it would. I mean, they're absolutely right about that. But if you take that argument to its logical conclusion, we should be spending 100% of GDP on prescription drugs for seniors, because anything less than that would reduce innovation.
No, come on. I think that's
exactly. It's absurd. You're right. It's absurd.
It is absurd.
So at what point, how do we know that the prices are too high? Because we can't take the drug company's word for it. They're never going to admit that the prices are high. And so far, Republicans haven't either, even though we've got a lot of research to show, to suggest that they are too high. And it's not just the economic research. I mean, Medicare Part D pays twice as much for drugs as the Veterans Health Administration, twice as much as other countries do, as Medicaid does, sometimes 4 times as much as other countries pay for prescription drugs. And that also means that the United States U.S. taxpayers and consumers are bearing a larger share of the cost of research and development than taxpayers in other countries. If you really want to punish taxpayers in other countries, cut drug prices here.
That's going to punish them overseas. How?
Drug companies will have to increase the prices that they charge to consumers and socialized health systems in other countries. So that would eliminate an implicit subsidy that Congress is giving to socialized health systems in other countries.
See, this is the thing. This is where you and I disagree. And probably maybe I'm not nearly as principled as you are. Is you get to like you, let's start with one of your threshold points. You talk about legalizing drugs. I was there when I was younger. I now look at the absolute devastation that it is causing individuals, families. I hate walking down the street in Washington, D.C. and smelling weed all the time. Every friggin' block, there's the smell.
It's better
of
than
weed.
Tobacco, though, isn't it?
I don't know that it is. What do we have? What do we have? Like a 1 decade respite from cigarette smoke on?
Yeah.
And I don't think cigarette smoke, the random cigarette doesn't bother me as much as the incessant weed smell in Washington, D.C.
Only pipes. I only like pipe smoke.
It's a great smell. Okay. but so then it's all well and good. I guess the libertarian argument is, okay, let these people wander around the streets, camp in the parks, let them kind of accost people coming down the street. Obviously, you're not for violence and assault, but it's unnerving and it degrades society to be walking down the street and have somebody in a psychotic break walking down the street because they have been taking way too many drugs that are currently illegal, or in some cases, you can have cannabinoid psychosis from marijuana, and you end up in the emergency room, or you're tripped out on the street. Okay, so I've evolved on that, and it's the same thing here with the Medicare Part D program. I absolutely agree that the thing was ripe for reform, but the question is, you passed a bill that, to your point, did not reduce inflation. The prices that are being negotiated are comparable in many circumstances to what the PBMs achieved in negotiating. You create a whole new bureaucracy, and you introduce the principle that they're going to set prices, which are going to be random, at least with the PBMs and the insurance companies. With all their flaws, there were private sector actors negotiating to lower the net prices that the drug companies launched. And the drug prices did tons of research before they launched a drug about what would be the price that would bear its efficacy, its safety profile, how would the physicians use it, how adherent would patients be. I mean, gazillions of dollars of market research to figure out what was a proper price for this drug. It's not like they're throwing a dart at the board or just saying, oh, gee, I want to get a new Lamborghini, so I'm going to charge this. It's like they do all this research, they launch it, they have to negotiate against the PBMs and the insurance companies. And now we've got this huge bureaucracy set up. And here's the other problem. I'm not saying that the primary justification of Medicare Part D is the R&D budget. I do think it's a consequence, but it was to get seniors access to drugs that they otherwise wouldn't have available to them because of the economics of being a senior. You can disagree with that, but that was the purpose of it. So it opened up access to seniors. Opening up access meant it drove innovation and research and development in that space. And then you upset the apple cart that has already been created without an alternative. So the Biden administration has to come in with this massive demonstration project for 3 years, which is going to cost tens of billions of dollars. And now Congress has to step in and figure out how to do it and how to fix it. And to your point earlier, they're not going to come up with a free market solution. They're going to come up with a new subsidy in order to shore up the Part D premiums. And what I think would be more valuable right now is to come up with, well, not more valuable because that's not fair to you or Cato, but we should come up with an alternative parallel system next to this. Like, would you expand health savings accounts to allow to give seniors control over more of their money to buy drugs? What would be the solution? Because it can't be my 79-year-old mother who's starting to have a little bit of addlement, or is it dementia? I'm not actually sure. She's got a heart flutter. She's worried about money. She's scared all the time. She wakes up at 3:00 in the morning and she doesn't want to spend $8,000 next year for heart medication. So we're just going to say, screw it. She's not going to get that subsidy. I mean, I don't understand. I don't think that works, because I think society is going to say, look, we value these people and we recognize that a lot of their economic decisions about their own health are frequently not rational at that age, and for a whole host of reasons. And we're going to try and help them make the decision that is best for them. And we're going to try and subsidize their health care because they can't go out in an economically viable way and buy it on their own. Now, it could be that you're absolutely right, that I'm all for all these new insurance projects, the insurance products. The insurance market is way too over-regulated. We need longer-term insurance and insurance into Medicare and all sorts of stuff. But that doesn't exist right now. So now we've just screwed up Medicare Part D without an alternative. That's what I can't figure out, is why can't we create some free market alternatives and some competition to some of these things before we screw them up, make them more expensive, make them more government centric, and make them less user friendly.
Okay, so that was a lot. Let me start with
the dumbest point first.
The drug war. So most of the problems that people ascribe to illicit drugs are actually a result of government prohibiting those drugs rather than the drugs themselves. We could get into that, but as far as things like, before I do that, things like cannabinoid psychosis, you've got the wrong Cato healthcare guy in this chair. You want to have my colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Singer, who's a general surgeon in Phoenix, Arizona, and who just wrote a book by the way. The title of it is Your Body, Your Healthcare. And he's on a book tour right now. So we could get him in here to talk to you about that. He is much savvier about medicine and the drug war, certainly.
I'd love to have him back. I can't imagine he's nearly as entertaining as.
And you'd be surprised. So there's that. But then with regard to Part D, a little bit of perspective. So the original purpose of Part D is to give people drug coverage because the original Medicare program didn't include it.
Right.
It was a health insurance plan that government designed, and it didn't keep up with changes in the marketplace and innovations in drug coverage and insurance coverage generally. And so what was it? Almost 40 years after Congress created this rigidly defined Medicare benefit, they said, well, maybe we noticed that it doesn't have drug coverage, even though most private plans do. Maybe we should create that. And it came up with this ham-handed thing. Even so, at the time Congress created Medicare prescription drug coverage, that entitlement program, 75% of enrollees already had drug coverage.
Yeah.
They got it either through an employer or some supplemental plan that they bought or from Medicaid. So Congress was only really targeting the 25% of enrollees who didn't already have drug coverage, but they ended up enrolling everybody.
Sure.
And so I think even on its own terms,
it's fair.
Part D was a bad idea because you ended up covering newly covering one enrollee for the price of four.
Right.
And that's a bad deal even by government standards. But what we're sort of getting back to the question that you asked me earlier, and I didn't quite get around to responding to, which is what should Congress have done instead of Medicare?
Yeah.
And
Part D.
Instead of Part D.
Did I say Part D or Medicare? I'm sorry.
Medicare.
Sorry.
I mean, you said Part D, but the same answer applies to Medicare broadly. And you ask, why can't we have more free market alternatives? And I think that's what Congress should have done, is created some. So the Medicare program has been a cause of a lot of government failure because it put people in a situation where they're spending the government's money when they go to get medical care, and the doctor is spending the government's money. And so when I go to see you, the doctor, we're spending the money as someone who is not in the room and who doesn't, frankly, care as much as a private insurance company does when it happens with private insurance. And so you, the doctor, were jacking up the prices you're charging Medicare and convincing me to come in for services more often, and more hospitalizations, and Medicare spending exploded. And all the rules that Medicare created ended up distorting the market for health insurance and for healthcare delivery and so forth in a lot of harmful ways. I've got an article about all the ways that I could find that where Medicare has reduced the quality of healthcare in the United States, and I'd be happy to talk about those. Congress could have avoided all of those problems if it had reformed Medicare instead of creating the prescription drug benefit. It had done the following, or if it had done this when it created Medicare in 1965, which is, don't create a $1 trillion program where the government manages the delivery of healthcare to tens of millions of people. If you want to subsidize people's medical consumption, just give them cash. Give them cash like the Social Security program does. The Social Security program doesn't distort any markets.
And then don't care. Just give it to them and don't care what they say.
It doesn't distort any markets except for maybe the labor market because of the payroll tax, but that's it. It doesn't distort the market for anything that seniors buy: housing, food, greens fees, whatever. It doesn't distort those markets because when you give people cash, it doesn't have that effect the way in-kind subsidies like Medicare does when you give them stuff. If Congress, instead of expanding the Medicare program, had just expanded Social Security, taken all that money and expanded Social Security, it would have distorted. There would still be government distortions of healthcare markets, but they wouldn't be nearly as bad as they are right now. And that's what Congress should have done instead of enact Medicare Part D. If it wanted to give drug coverage to people, I would have said don't increase Medicare spending at all. But if you were going to take all the old Medicare spending and the new Medicare spending and give it to enrollees as cash, and let them buy a health insurance plan with drug coverage that meets their needs instead of some rigid definition that the government creates. And by the way, that drives up healthcare prices. And so that's also what I've been advocating for that Congress do for a number of years now, is take the Medicare. Congress spends about almost $1 trillion on Medicare right now. Take that, divide it up among enrollees, give it to them as cash. Give low income and sicker enrollees a bigger Medicare check so that they can afford a basic package of benefits, just like, and then the wealthier and the healthier seniors get smaller checks. They'll spend the money much more carefully. They will demand lower prices, and quality competition between providers will be much greater and correct a lot of the quality problems that Medicare has created over the past 50 years.
Okay. Well, listen, Michael Cannon, Director of Health Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. Thank you for joining DC EKG.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for joining DC EKG. I want to thank our executive producer, Lauren Timmerman, our producer, John CZ Swartaki, our sponsor, Survivors for Solutions, and our distributor, Bigwig Media.